Cheese is complicated. Not all cheeses are created equal in the slightest in terms of their impact on our overall health, our metabolism, even our overall fat loss. So without further ado, we'll jump right into cheeses ranked from best to worst. We have a specific scoring system that I used here. So we're looking at processing. So that includes like how much in the way of emulsifiers are added. What's the nutrient density like? Are there stabilizers? Are there flavors added to it? Also going to look at like the ability for a cheese to retain its enzymes, its microbial function. And then we're also going to look at things like the fatty acid profile. So like what cheeses have the best fat profile? Higher monounsaturated fat, lower polyunsaturated fat in some cases, but also just flat out ratios, what they look like. And then lastly, we're gonna look at the protein to calorie ratio because that plays a really big part as well. Please drop a comment down below for the algorithm. It gets these videos ranking where they need to go. Simply just drop in a comment that says algorithm or hello and just get in the habit of doing this whenever you can. It really does make a very big difference. So when you're looking at cheeses and you're shopping for them, the first kind of thing you need to always be looking for is, even if you are in a state that does not allow raw milk, you a lot of times can still have raw cheeses, right? So you can still find raw cheddar even in states that don't carry raw milk. So it's slightly different classifications. So whenever you can, try to opt for things that are raw, or if you can, at least find things that are like aged for 6 months or more. And as we get into the specific cheeses, we'll talk a little bit more about where the aging matters and where it does not. I also put a link down below, 30% off your first order through Thrive Market. So your entire grocery order through Thrive Market, and they have all kinds of different dried cheeses and things like this. So you can follow the rules that I'm talking about here, even as it applies to different kinds of ways to eat cheese and in dried or dehydrated format as well. So that link down below, 30% off through your entire grocery order and a free gift. So the ingredients you're gonna find in foods with Thrive Market, they're clean. That's the whole idea. So they're making cleaner food and more nutrient dense food and stuff without the hidden nastiness, more accessible to people all over the country. So really, really cool. That link is down below. Again, 30% off plus a free gift, your entire first grocery order. All right, so jumping right into it, the number one is Pecorino Romano. Now, I've talked about Pecorino Romano a ton, but let's just unpack why it makes the cut, okay? Now, there's another form of Pecorino that people may have heard before called Pecorino Sarda. Now, Pecorino Sarda comes from Sardinia, right? So that comes down to like the true Pecorino that people like in Europe are really looking for. Pecorino Romano is more the somewhat industrialized version of it, but still really, really good and still meets most of the mark, okay? But if you're in Italy itself, you're probably gonna want that first kind of Pecorino. Either way, Pecorino's good. It has some of the rawest and most minimal processing of any of the cheeses that are out there. So you're gonna retain all of the enzyme function. You're gonna have a lot more in the way of bioactive peptides, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But it's also aged 12 to 15 months, almost at minimum. Okay, so this breaks down so much of the lactose that it's practically lactose free, but it also allows for a lot more cultures to actually build. So when you're aging cheese, that's when you're getting a lot of the benefit. Now, also, 35% of it by weight is protein. And since Pecorino is coming from sheep, it is an A2 casein. So if cheese, the protein's gonna be a casein cheese, obviously because the whey is stripped away. No pun intended, away. So the whey is stripped and you're left with casein. So if it's cow cheese, casein is fine, but the reality is, at least in the US, most of the cows are A1 variety cows and you're not getting the best quality casein protein. It could be problematic, could cause digestive issues. There's evidence to suggest that it's less about the lactose and more about the actual casein proteins. So you always wanna have an A2 variety whenever possible. That doesn't matter when you're dealing with goat or sheep because they are naturally an A2 variety anyway. So you're not like getting that different kind of casein to begin with. So 35% protein, so very high protein cheese to begin with. Now, the International Dairy Journal published a paper that was looking at the bioactive peptides in this cheese. Super wild thing happened. They found that there are 26 bioactive peptides in Pecorino Romano. Already a ridiculously high, might be the highest amount of bioactive peptides. These are peptides that have like an effect on our body in a positive way. After digestion, there were 52 bioactive peptides. So these bioactive peptides were actually broken down by the gut and created more different kinds of bioactive peptides. These are things that have actions in the body. They might help with fatty acid oxidation. They might help with gene expression in certain ways. So it truly is a cheese that has a benefit to it. A lot of these bioactive peptides have antimicrobial effects. So you're looking at potential benefits when it comes to inflammation and whatnot. Now, not to mention, it's one of the highest concentrations of K2 when you're looking at any cheese. And then of course, it has the right fatty acid profile. You've got high amounts of C15 fat, which are the odd chain fatty acids or odd carbon chain fatty acids you're looking for in a saturated fat to be more cardiovascularly beneficial. Now we move into number 2. The second best is going to be straight up raw goat cheese. If you can't get sheep, get goat, all right? That's going to be the next best. Now, the thing with goat cheese is it's not always going to be aged. Sometimes it's not, but raw goat cheese in general is just a good quality cheese. And a lot of it has to do with just the sheer fatty acid profile. So you're talking high MCT oil content. It's one of the only cheeses that has a profound amount of MCTs in it, which digest very fast, give you stable energy, very good for the brain, have some links to fat loss as well. But we're also talking very high in CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, which has strong links to fat loss and specifically even visceral belly fat in some cases. So really good fatty acid profile and a little bit of omega-3s in there too. What's interesting from a digestive perspective is raw goat cheese has smaller fat globules. So it actually digests easier from a fat perspective. So you need less bile. So if you have a gallbladder issue, you can do goat cheese a little bit easier. And then we're also looking at pretty strong probiotic effect. So when you're factoring all these things together, it makes the number 2 place. Now we move into number 3. Number 3 is actually one of my favorites. Growing up in Northern California, there is a place that's called Point Reyes. And if anyone is from the Bay Area or kind of knows this, leave it in the comments. I just always love hearing people that are, at least from my old neck of the woods. There's an area called Point Reyes, which I practically just lived at as a kid. My wife too, we met in high school. Always hiking there, always horseback riding in Point Reyes. They have the best tasting blue cheese, and it's called Point Reyes Blue Cheese. Not sponsored by them, don't know anybody that works there. I just know to this day, I still buy that blue cheese. It is so dang good. So I'm happy to hear this. Why does blue cheese make this cut so much? Well, for one, super high K2 content, super high mineral content. Part of it has to do with the sort of the processing, the fermentation of it. But the penicillin molds that are actually used to make blue cheese, or in some cases Roquefort, which is essentially blue cheese made from goat cheese, is really, really powerful as an antimicrobial. You actually have almost medicinal-like properties that are coming with blue cheese. And for some reason, it's not talked about that much. Like, we don't actually look at the benefit of it. This activation, this fermentation, it actually does something within the body. But what's wild is, especially if it's Roquefort, you're gonna have a really high level of C15 fats. So again, I've talked about this when it comes down to, say, Pecorino Romano. But Roquefort, again, you're just getting like a blue cheese made from goat, really high content of C15, which is a fat that actually helps the cell become more rigid. Right? And definitely best consumed when you can get it from natural sources, right? They have supplements out there, and I stand behind some of them, but getting it from food, always going to be the best case scenario, right? So you're helping with the cell becoming structured in such a way where the membrane is strong. So it prevents more in the way of oxidative stress and more in the way of sort of lipid peroxidation, where the cells oxidize and the lipid membrane of the cells oxidize. But one of the coolest things that happens with like Roquefort and Stilton is there is a high amount of spermidine in it. Now, spermidine is known to induce autophagy, which is like people will take spermidine supplements because of how it induces autophagy. So can you get this from regular cow blue cheese? Not quite like you can. You possibly can get a tiny bit of spermidine, but you're really looking if you're getting it from like Roquefort or Stilton. So this makes it like a cellular powerhouse. It's almost a longevity cheese in a way, because you've got the C15, you've got all these other compounds, you've got these other things that are working in your favor with the antimicrobial properties and the bioactive peptides. Just a tremendous, tremendous cheese. Which leads me to the next one, which is another one that a lot of people like, and that's good old-fashioned cheddar. But cheddar is sneakily nefarious sometimes because it's the kind that's wrapped in the typical plastic. It's probably not good aged cheddar. So you need to kind of look at the label and make sure it's aged at least like 3 to 6 months. Good aged cheddar is gonna have the benefit that we want. There's 2 bioactive peptides, VPP and IPP, that are in properly aged cheddar. And these are actually natural ACE inhibitors. So they help with blood pressure a lot. So they're actually cardiovascularly beneficial, and it's nothing to sneeze at. These are pretty profound effects from these bioactive peptides. Problem is, you don't get the bioactive peptides unless it's aged properly. So again, minimum 3 months, preferred 6 months aged on your cheddar. There's also a bioactive peptide known as nisin, or nisine, some people will call it. That's an antimicrobial peptide that is very, very well known. So people have talked about that peptide in various cheeses, namely cheddar varieties and white cheddar varieties, as having potential like gut benefits, but also just general antimicrobial effects. Now, some of the downsides, there's a little bit more processing, so you lose some of the probiotic effect, and a lot of time the cheddars aren't aged, so that's a huge downside. Also, higher sodium content. Now, that does matter, right? The sodium content, like, it adds up, right? So pretty high sodium in cheddars. Next up is Brie. We're kind of getting in the middle of the road here. Now, Brie is technically still made from a penicillium mold variety, so it still has some of those benefits. The downside is you're only aging it for a few weeks. So you're not getting a whole lot of the fermentation, you're not getting a whole lot of the antimicrobial effect, and also a lot of Brie cheeses are mass produced with like massive amounts of pasteurization and like huge processing. So like cheap Bries are easy to come by because they can process a cheese and make it smooth and creamy, but it's not like real Brie. So just keep an eye out and like look at what's in it. Are they adding emulsifiers? Are they adding these other things? Are they adding flavorings to make it taste more like Brie? Good quality Brie doesn't take a long time to make. They can turn it over in a few weeks. So it's not one that needs to be like altered a lot. People still do. So as a result, it's gonna have lower cultures, it's gonna have low bioactive peptides, but it is very strong when it comes to vitamin K2, which helps get that vitamin D into the right place, and it's quite high in the right kinds of fats, so CLA and C15. So from a fatty acid profile, it's pretty darn good. So I do like Brie for that case. Now we move into one that's a little bit lower, and there's good and bad to this. Mozzarella cheese is a great cheese, but it's only aged a few days. So you have like practically no overall benefit from like that perspective. But from a macronutrient perspective, it is doing a great job of protein by weight. Okay, so, and a relatively lower fat content. It actually has some of the lowest saturated fat content of any cheeses. So you're looking at higher monounsaturated fatty acid content. Part of that just has to do with how long it's aged and dried. So you're just looking at a little more water volume in there, but you're looking at relatively low sodium. You're looking at lower fat, lower saturated fat, high protein by weight, and decent fat profile to begin with, really good fat profile if you wanted to go to buffalo mozzarella, where you're gonna have a little bit more omega-3 in there. So it's not that it's a bad fat or a bad cheese, it just doesn't have the same additional benefits that you start almost getting like crazy, like medicinal like benefits when you go up market on these aged cheeses. So buffalo mozzarella, if you can, regular mozzarella, but there's a lot of mozzarella imposters, like a lot of just the traditional simple processed white cheese calls itself mozzarella or jack, but it's not really actually mozzarella, so just pay attention to that. Now in Europe, I love that they have these like high protein, almost dried out mozzarella, so they like strain it so it's more concentrated with higher protein. Super cool stuff. And lastly, we have American cheese. Here's the thing, American cheese is not even really cheese. They take cheese scraps, they take part of the cheese, they mix it with emulsifiers and flavors and all kinds of different additives to turn it into a cheese-like product that'll melt easily. It shouldn't even make the list, but I wanted to put it on the list. Okay, that is a low quality cheese that, although the affordability is nice, it's one of these things that from the emulsifier standpoint and what it can potentially do to your gut barrier integrate with polysorbate and other emulsifiers, it's just not worth it. So that's a cheese that is like, it's not just ranking poorly, it's like, just get it out. If you're gonna go for that, just go for a cheaper mozzarella, which is at least not gonna have negative impact. It's just gonna be a less high quality cheese, but it's still gonna have a decent macronutrient profile. As always, keep it locked in here on the channel. See you tomorrow.